Football history remembers legends, but some greats fade into the background, overshadowed, uncelebrated. Frank Stapleton was once a feared striker, a relentless force leading the line for two of England's biggest clubs. Yet today, his name barely echoes in discussions of football's greatest forwards. How does a player who led Arsenal's attack, became Manchester United's top scorer, and captained his country slip into the shadows? His story isn't just about goals. It's about ambition, betrayal, and the cruel nature of football's unforgiving cycle. He wasn't a flashy name, but he delivered on the pitch, outworking and outmuscling defenders with a warrior-like mentality. He climbed the ranks of English football at a time when physical battles defined the game. From Arsenal to Manchester United, he didn't just play, he carried the expectations of two football giants. But despite his impact, his legacy remains overlooked. Was it his style of play that made him forgettable? Did off-field decisions cost him long-term recognition? Or was it simply the misfortune of playing in an era that didn't reward consistency the way it does today? This is the story of Frank Stapleton, the rise, the peak, and the silent fall of a striker who deserved more. Before the silence, there was noise. Frank Stapleton's rise wasn't a tale of raw talent alone. It was built on grit, intelligence, and an unshakable drive. Born in Dublin, he grew up in an era when Irish footballers had to fight twice as hard to earn recognition in England. He was never the most technically gifted, nor the flashiest, but he had something that couldn't be taught, a warrior's mentality. At just 17, Arsenal saw the potential hidden beneath his rugged playing style. By 18, he was wearing the famous red and white, and soon he was leading their attack with a maturity beyond his years. His breakthrough came in the late 1970s, a time when English football was defined by aggression, long balls, and brutal defensive battles. But Stapleton thrived in the chaos. He wasn't just a goal scorer, he was a target man, a leader, and a nightmare for defenders. His aerial dominance, strength, and composure in front of goal made him a key figure in Arsenal's rebuild. And in 1979, he delivered the club its greatest moment of the decade, scoring in the FA Cup final to secure a legendary 3-2 victory over Manchester United. At just 22, he had already cemented himself in Arsenal's history. But was Arsenal enough for a man with bigger ambitions? The goals kept coming, but silverware remained elusive. As Arsenal stagnated, Stapleton faced a choice: loyalty or legacy. And when the biggest club in England came knocking, he made a decision that would change everything. Loyalty in football is a fragile concept. One moment, you're a hero, the next, a traitor. Frank Stapleton knew this all too well. In 1981, he made the most controversial decision of his career, leaving Arsenal for their biggest rivals, Manchester United. For Arsenal fans, it was unforgivable. Stapleton wasn't just any player. He was their top striker, their FA Cup hero, the man they believed would lead them back to glory. But Arsenal's decline was evident. They were falling behind the powerhouses of English football, and Stapleton wanted more. He wanted trophies, he wanted history, and he believed Manchester United could give him both. United, under Ron Atkinson, were desperate to reclaim their status at the top. They needed a striker who could deliver immediately, and Stapleton was the perfect fit. Strong, clinical, and fearless, he became the spearhead of United's attack. In his very first season, he did exactly what he had done at Arsenal, scoring in an FA Cup final and lifting the trophy. But this wasn't just any victory. It was against Brighton in 1983, marking the beginning of United's resurgence. Yet something was different. At Arsenal, he was adored. At United, he was respected, but never truly loved. The expectations were heavier, the pressure relentless. He was leading the line for one of the biggest clubs in the world. But United, for all their promise, were still in Liverpool's shadow. Was this move truly the step forward he had envisioned? His goals kept coming, but United were still short of winning the league, the ultimate prize. Year after year, they fell short. Meanwhile, Arsenal fans had long erased his name from their hearts. Had he sacrificed his legacy for an uncertain dream? Every footballer fears the moment when time starts working against them. For Frank Stapleton, that moment came faster than he ever expected. His early years at Manchester United had been promising, An FA Cup win, consistent performances, and the trust of Ron Atkinson. But football is ruthless. One bad season, one managerial change, and everything shifts. By the mid-1980s, United were struggling to break Liverpool's dominance. Stapleton, once the club's attacking spearhead, was no longer the same force. His goals dried up and doubts crept in. Was he still the player United needed? The answer became painfully clear when Alex Ferguson arrived in 1986. Ferguson was on a mission to rebuild United, and in his vision, Stapleton didn't fit. The game was evolving, and so was the club. Younger, hungrier talents were emerging, and suddenly Stapleton, the man who had once been United's main striker, was an afterthought. He was 31, and his influence was fading fast. The worst part? There was no grand farewell, no heroic exit. Instead, it was an unceremonious departure, released in 1987, without the league title he had once chased. From Arsenal's icon to United's forgotten man, his decline was complete. But his story didn't end there. Stapleton refused to fade away quietly. He moved to clubs across England, France, and even the United States, trying to prolong his career. But it was clear, his best days were behind him. The goals, the accolades, the roaring crowds, it all felt like a distant memory. So what went wrong? Was it age, a tactical shift, or had he simply chosen the wrong path? The next chapter of his story isn't about success, it's about survival. For a player who once led the line for Arsenal and Manchester United, the years after Old Trafford were a harsh reality check. Stapleton, now in his 30s, was still searching for relevance in a game that had already moved on. But where do you go when the doors of the elite clubs are shut? He signed with Derby County in 1987, hoping to rekindle his form, but the magic was gone. His sharpness had faded, and the once lethal instincts that made him a feared striker seemed to betray him. He managed only one season before moving again, this time to France, joining Le Havre. A fresh start? Not quite. It was another brief, unremarkable stint, a pattern that would repeat itself. By now, Stapleton was no longer seen as a star, but a journeyman. He bounced between clubs, including Blackburn Rovers, Huddersfield Town, and even a spell in Belgium with RFC Liège. Each move felt like a desperate attempt to hold on to something that was slipping away. His final playing years took him to the United States, where he joined the San Francisco Bay Blackhawks, a once great striker, now playing in a league far from the European spotlight. It was a quiet and unceremonious end. No grand farewell, no standing ovation. And yet, what choice did he have? Football had given him everything, but it had also taken it away just as quickly. He wasn't the first to experience this decline, and he wouldn't be the last. But this wasn't just about football anymore. What happens when a player who once lived for the big stage suddenly finds himself in the shadows? Some adapt, some struggle, and some simply disappear. For Stapleton, his next chapter would prove even more uncertain. For many footballers, retirement is a second half they never prepared for. Some stay in the game through coaching or punditry, while others disappear into the background. For Frank Stapleton, the transition was anything but smooth. After hanging up his boots, Stapleton attempted to stay involved in football. Management seemed like the natural path, but the success he enjoyed as a player didn't follow him into coaching. He had a brief spell as manager of Bradford City in the mid-90s, but it was a short-lived and largely forgettable experience. Just as his playing career had faded, so too did his time in the dugout. With few options left in football, he found himself drifting. The man who had once scored in FA Cup finals and led the line for Manchester United was now struggling to find his place in the world. Unlike many of his peers, he never secured a long-term role in punditry or coaching. The industry had moved on, and Stapleton was left behind. But beyond the professional struggles, what toll does this take on a person? When the cheers stop, when the phone no longer rings with offers, how does a player cope with the silence? Some find comfort in new careers, others in family life. But for many, the absence of football leaves an unfillable void. Stapleton's legacy in football remains, but it's a quiet one. He was once an icon, but history doesn't always remember those who simply fade away. His story is a reminder that football, for all its glory, is unforgiving. It builds legends, but it also forgets them. And so as the years passed, the name Frank Stapleton slowly drifted into the archives of football history. His goals, his triumphs, his struggles, all now part of a past that fewer and fewer remember. But does that mean his story doesn't matter? Or is it exactly the kind of story that football should never forget? Football is full of legends, some celebrated, others forgotten. But should players like Frank Stapleton be remembered more? Or is football's history too vast to hold on to every name? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into football's forgotten stories, make sure to subscribe for more untold football history, lost legacies, and the moments that shaped the game. Your support helps keep these stories alive.